Hey, P-Bio, welcome to day 80. Can you believe it? Wow. Now, if we look at this, we're going to dig deeper into the interconnection between your wallet and the environment and, get a little idea of what's going on. So hopefully you recognize this guy. This is one of the cutest creatures on Earth. I'm pretty sure I took this picture in South Africa. And, of course, this is a baby African elephant. I mean, you just don't get cuter than that. He was chasing some birds and showing off for me, right? Now, what I want to know, of course, is this guy has now been really made famous, make his ears a little bit bigger, and he becomes Disney's favorite character, Dumbo. Everybody knows Dumbo because, they have to grow into their ears. Now, they can't fly, but they can do really cute stuff. Here's what I want to know. There's this thing that everybody has. I even own one of them, right? It's called a smartphone. Now, Dumbo thinks that smartphones are dumb phones. I want to know why. So stop me for a second. Write it up, draw and explain it. See if you can figure out the connection between, why Dumbo thinks that smartphones are dumb phones. Now, of course, in this, we're not talking about the fact that since smartphones have come about, people talk to each other less and have become less intelligent. That's a different story. Instead, we should be talking about elephants, right? Now, this is a baby elephant. They have, of course, matured very, very slowly because they're very social creatures. He could live for over 90 years and become an enormous male elephant, a tusker as they call him, and of course a huge factor in the African bush. During its lifetime, it will spend the first couple of, well, at least the first decade into its teens, hanging out with its maternal group, because they're a matriarchal society, where the actual species the parents will take close care of these little baby elephants, hide them from predators, keep them under close eye. And of course, they'll be eventually kicked out when they become larger males, so they don't mate with their sisters and things like that. Terribly cute creatures. Where do you find them? You find them in Africa, right? Now, this is a cell phone. And with smartphones today on our touchscreens, a lot of people don't understand that behind that, the revolution that became possible for these smartphones to take over our social life was these things called capacitors. And capacitors, of course, can hold a slight charge and then release that charge, which allows you to do all the cool touchscreen stuff and, like things and unlike things and tweet that and snap that or whatever you're doing with those things these days, right? Now, to have that, you have to have a rare resource on Earth. And that's, of course, in this place called the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has the largest concentration of this stuff called Coltan. And Coltan, of course, has this combination of a thing called columbite, which has niobium in it. It's a rare earth metal, and tantalum. And those two things together, especially the tantalum, is key as a semiconductor to make these capacitors that have these little microscopic, of course, abilities to hold charge and release those things so you can make commands on your screen. Unfortunately, the largest supply of coltan, this semiconductor, is stuck right here in the middle of Africa. And there's some deposits up in Russia and China, but the biggest supply on Earth is right there in the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? Stationed right in the middle of the Congo rainforest, right? Now, this is what a coltan mine looks like. You can see that it's in a very, very poor part of the world. If you've ever been near it, I have in Uganda. And you can see that because of that, there's not a lot of mechanization. So if you want to dig up the coltan, you basically get the poor farmers from the area around it, and they dig it up by hand, right? Now, you can see, obviously, this would destroy part of the environment, but also it's giving these people, some income, right? Who is that guy? He looks military, doesn't he? Well, he's actually not working for the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's a militia member, the machine gun. Right? And that's because his militia currently is in control of this coltan mine. And if you don't know what's been going on in the Congo for the last 30 years, militias have been fighting back and forth to take control of the resources because it's a place that's rich in oil, uranium, and now the big boom, coltan. That coltan, of course, the tin, the tungsten, and the gold that go into it, the tantalum especially, are what make our new world of cell phones and touchscreens possible so that we can, spend our time tweeting or snapping. Now, what that means, of course, for people in the Congo is these folks, they're here. He's not just protecting the coal mine. He's also, of course, protecting his assets because these people are slaves. They are actually digging this up, and they don't have a choice about that. One, because if they don't, they'll starve. And two, because many times the militia will actually kill the people if they stop working at the actual coltan mine. That ties together, of course, the fact that the cheapest type of labor is child labor. So this is child slavery. all to make your cell phone possible. Sadder than that, if we dig into it, because this has been happening for all these years, these militias will come into an area, they'll take control of the Colt mines or the gold mines, because there's gold in your circuitry as well. And when a large group of armed men come into an area, what do they tend to do? They tend to rape, and we're talking about mass gang rapes of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of women. And when they do that, of course, then the next militia will come in and they'll slaughter and kill a bunch of the locals, and whoever they don't kill, of course, they will then take and put into slave labor to dig up coltan. And when they do that, of course, there's another side effect. These women that are gang raped often get pregnant. And when they get pregnant, they later give birth to these children who, unfortunately, are the product of the militias raping them. And then those kids are taken into slave labor because little hands are very good at mining and they take less food. So that basically to supply your cell phone requires a lot of murder, rape, and child slavery, which most people have no clue about, right? Now you might ask yourself how they're pulling this off. Well, it's because they're heavily armed. How do they have all these impressive, Russian machine guns and Chinese machine guns, the AK-47s? Well, the only way you can buy all of those arms to hold on to the coltan to make money selling it to companies to make cell phones is if you have an income source, which brings us to Dumbo. The other thing that you find in these parts of Africa is you find some of the largest populations, or at least you used to, of African elephants. And one of the commodities that's very, very popular, especially in Asia, even today, is elephant ivory. So unfortunately, what these militias also do is they come in and they fund poachers as well as they become poachers themselves. They find a herd. They usually will kill one of the babies or wound one of the babies. With machine gun fire, they'll then machine gun the rest of the family group, which will not leave the baby. They then hack off the front of the face using a chainsaw so they can get at the tusks. And you can see the remnants that are left behind this. This has killed hundreds of thousands of elephants in the last 30 years. And you can see the stockpile as it is illegal to trade in ivory, but it's so lucrative that poor folks that are there that don't have a choice, they go into poaching, or the militia makes them go into poaching so that you can see that, this makes the money to make the machine guns, to get the machine guns, so you can get the coltan to make the cell phone. So you might be like, hey, I never went out into the forest and killed an elephant, but you did, indirectly, right? Now, this is a good example of what you buy is what you vote for. And a lot of people are like, I'm a teenager, I can't vote on any power. Nonsense. You vote every time that you open up your wallet, you use your credit card, you use your Google Pay or your iPay or whatever it's called, Apple Pay, yeah, that's it. And the key thing of this is what you buy decides what the government and the economy goes for, so you actually vote for whatever you purchase. It's the most powerful vote you cast every day in your life. And there's one group of individuals on Earth that have more voting power than anybody else on Earth. And they are the group that spends more money on consumer items than anybody else. Can you guess who they are? They're American teenagers. You, per capita, spend more money than any other group on the planet. So that means that you have the biggest vote of anybody on the planet, right? Now, key thing with that, you can see that I have a smartphone. Today in our society, it's kind of a requirement, especially once you have kids and a job and all that stuff. A lot of people right now are working on these things. But this is not a new phone. This is actually a secondhand phone that I got from my mother-in-law to replace my other secondhand phone that was actually a third-hand phone through my wife and a friend. I will never buy a new cell phone because you don't need to. There's lots of used ones out there, because I don't want to contribute to another group of people being enslaved in the Congo or raped in the Congo, or my favorite thing, wildlife like elephants being decimated so that I can play on my phone and text things, though I tend not to because I found that smartphones make people dumb. They're dumb phones to me. So, of course, that's one way that you can reduce this. That's not just cell phones. It's also any electronic device that contains capacitors like TVs. My TV is a secondhand TV. I will not buy a new TV because that one was already created. It was going to go to a dump, so why not reuse it? And then I don't have to destroy another piece of nature, right? Other examples of this. Every month, I pay an electric bill to Puget Sound Energy, like many of you do here in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a great system because a lot of their electricity is generated by hydroelectric dams. Yes, those have greatly affected salmon, but the good news is they don't put out huge amounts of CO2. They're also converting to this green power program. And a few years ago, I made the decision, hey, I'm going to pay an additional about $15 a month, 15 to 20, depending on what part of the year it is. And what I can choose is that it will make that all of my electricity that I consume comes from renewable energy sources. And that includes funding their wind projects, funding turbine projects, the idea of possibly having ones with tidal, as well as they're looking at some methane in terms of natural gas deposits that are there too. But the biggest one, of course, is hydro and wind power. And you can see that it's had an impact as they've increased their number of wind things as you drive over towards the gorge nowadays. You can see that what it changes from my house annually is you go up into the 11,000 range of pounds of CO2, dropping it down to 0.89. And that's simply by me paying an extra $15 a month, $20 a month, which adds up to, if it's $20 a month, $240 a year, that's worth it to me to have an ecosystem that's intact. That's me voting with my wallet. What I pay for is what I vote for. I want less CO2 in the environment. Or another example, you're like, oh yeah, Neil, you've been to Uganda, you travel every single year. Yeah, that's one of the worst contributors that you can possibly have, air travel. Well, I realized that, and that's why I figured out a way that I could go to this thing called the climatecare.org. It's an awesome, easy-to-use website, and it has this thing called carbon offsetting. So, for instance, last year I went to Madagascar, which is a huge CO2 contribution, but I wasn't going to say, hey, that's on the planet. I was actually going to take responsibility for it. And what you do is you calculate in, you put in how the distance that you're traveling, the interconnections that you do that, it figures out how many tons of CO2 would be contributed from you to have that flight. And then it sets off a cost of that. The money that comes from that I paid as basically a self-imposed carbon tax, then went into actually going into fund things like wind turbine projects in India or better stoves in places like Uganda or Madagascar where I was going, projects that are actually funneled at reducing carbon footprints. And this is a for-profit institution so that they actually have a really good system set up. And they're, formulated so that if our governments aren't going to decide to actually fund carbon offsetting, which we absolutely need to do if we want to turn this around, you can actually make the choice to do that yourself. And there's a possibility you might be able to get tax rebates or exemptions from doing that, right? Increase your refund. But the biggest thing is this is a way to possibly fund locking up carbon or putting less carbon in the atmosphere and still doing what we want. It's imposing a carbon tax on yourself until our federal government or state governments figure out, and we get that approved because we haven't approved that. People don't like spending extra money to save the planet that keeps them alive. But I'm quite in support of it, right? Now, other parts of this could be like, here's another example, AirPods. AirPods, you see, everybody has them now so they can ignore each other. You just hook them up to your cell phone so that you can't actually have any social skills. Well, the problem with AirPods is they're designed to only last about a year to 2 years. They have a lot of cobalt in them. So like cell phones, if you ever drop your cell phone screen and it smashes really easy, they have what's built into them called engineered obsolescence. They have a battery in, say, an iPhone that you can't take out yourself, so you got to get a new iPhone. That is engineered to fail so that you have to buy another one from the company. And that's, of course, why I don't have AirPods. I know that the cobalt comes from the same place. It comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So if you really like your cell phones, your consumable materials, like smartphone materials, anything with a capacitor, electronics, guess what? You're funding slavery and the death of wildlife in other parts of the world. We just don't see it because we're in our little bubble of the Western world where everything is, expendable and we throw it out. Some people have also asked, okay, well, what about when I'm done with my cell phone or it's not working, how do I recycle it? Well, unfortunately, what they found out is a lot of the recycling firms that were recycling cell phones, they were just shipping them to Macau, which is on just the edge of China. And in that place, what they were doing basically connected to Hong Kong was they had a bunch of poorly paid slave labor. They were paid, but they were working for pennies and their survival, that were taking and melting off the plastic just to get at the copper wiring that's inside of it, which meant that it was releasing tons of toxins into them. They have one of the highest cancer rates, and it dumps right into the South China Sea. So make sure you do your research on the recycling part. I would say the best way to recycle would be keep it within the family and ask yourself, do you really need that new device, or can you use, the one that you currently have, right? Now, remember that that's where your vote comes in. It's the most powerful vote that you'll ever cast, especially in an electoral college system that isn't really that efficient anyways. That's another story. So one of the things that we can see here, of course, is your eco topics is to make sure that you inform people of this. If people understood that their cell phone led to people going into slavery as children, being raped, murdered, and lots of beautiful, cute little elephants being murdered, they probably wouldn't need a new cell phone, every year, or they'd figure out a way to make theirs last longer, or maybe treat it better. And maybe they'd figure out, maybe I shouldn't invest in products that are engineered to fail so quickly. If I spend extra money on something that's actually engineered so that it will break down or be able to be recycled correctly, which is where we need to go with our economy, things that are forward engineered so that you can actually backward engineer them, so you can forward think to actually take the thing, rebuild another phone with it, and use the components. That would be worth to me spending extra money to get the better product that's better for the environment that keeps me alive. But I just wanted to give you some examples of things that you probably didn't know about. And next time you pick up your cell phone, think of these kids and think of this cute little Dumbo, right?